So we're going to try something a little bit different today. I've got the Zebu in my rack to demonstrate this patch with. I thought that'd be a cool idea, but it involves changing all my camera stuff, and now I'm looking at you from a weird angle, and I'm looking over here, and I think it's going to be a not great, but but it is different. So what I have today is a sequencer with a bunch of generative features called Beholder. Um, you can program in a sequence up to 16 steps, and then you can introduce all sorts of probabilities to it, like the probability that it changes direction or skips a gate or holds on to a note or skips over a note entirely or applies a note modifier, a sort of, well, a note modifier, so it changes octave, let's say. Uh, let's get into it. So I've already got a sequence running, but I wanted to show how you record a new sequence. So to do that, we use the clear sequence button. And then the sequence stops playing. Boy, this is going to be a good one. And then you press the record button, and you can either record using the keyboard here. There's the camera is not picking this up very well. These top two rows are a different color, and then there's a chromatic keyboard here on the middle two rows. You can use that keyboard, or you can use MIDI. So if you press the MIDI button on the second page, you'll use a MIDI controller for input. And you can also transpose this keyboard. There's octave up buttons, and when you use them, it'll change the octave of the keyboard. I'm recording a sequence now, so you can also transpose the entire keyboard. So if you want to use a different key, you would just sort of change the root note. If you wanted it in E or whatever, I'm going to keep it in C because why not? And I'll just program in some more stuff. And once you stop recording, it'll automatically begin playback. You can pause the sequence at any time using it's called play, but it's really pause. It stops the sequence at the step that it's at. You can also reset the sequence. So if you do that, it should begin at step one instead of, where it was. And when you're recording, you can introduce rests. There's a rest button. You can also redo a step. It's important to note that if you do redo a step, you have to actually redo it. So you can't use it to, like, let's say you programmed in an 8-note sequence and you wanted it to be 7, you realized. You can't redo a step that way. You have to put in a new step, just to be clear. And there's an overdub function, so you can edit what's in the buffer. You can also transpose the sequence using either a MIDI controller or the keyboard here. and it'll use as reference the first note you programmed. So I had to jump back an octave to that C2 so that it would go back to where it started. But yeah, you can transpose, and what it'll do is use the first note you programmed in, whatever that is, as the point of reference. So if it was a D2 instead and I played the C2, the sequence would be transposed down 2 semitones. Okay, so this is, the basic note entry stuff. You can also edit individual steps. So if I wanted that to be a D2 instead of a C2, these notes across the top, these value modules show what note the sequence is playing at the time. They light up a little bit. But they can also be used to edit the sequence. The thing I'll point out about that is that when you edit the notes, there's no reset function for that. So if you program in a new sequence and it sounds weird, that's probably why. And a trick for that is when you clear the sequence, it should clear all of the notes, unfortunately, except for the step that it was on when you cleared it, will still show a note. But you can go through at that point, and if they're in their default, they should show a 0. So that's something you can do if you start messing around with it. But it's a nice way to be able to edit sequences kind of granularly, as well as having the note input, which is a little bit easier for the initial programming. So the fun stuff, though, comes in on the second and third page. First, I'm going to increase the speed a little bit. We have a tap tempo here. It also takes clock over CV, and it also accepts clock via MIDI. And we can apply swing. Positively and negatively. We can adjust the gate length. And here's where the probabilistic stuff starts coming in. We have this control called progress chance, and as we turn it down, the sequence will get stuck on notes. So it doesn't progress. At 1, the chance that it progresses is 100%, but as you decrease that, the chance that it progresses diminishes. Then we have this control called play chance, and what that is the chance that it produces a gate on that step. So right now there's a gate being produced on every step, but that's kind of busy, and maybe we want a little bit more variety. We can also give it a probability that it will start playing backwards. And that's with the backwards chance control. So at 0, it'll always play forward. And at 1, it'll always play backward, but at points in between, it can switch directions. And the backwards chance control determines how likely it is to start moving backwards. So if we look at the I'm going to change the progress chance to 100. We'll see it sometimes move backward a step for a step or two. And we can also affect how often it samples for this change in direction. So if we take the sample rate and decrease it, the changes in direction will last longer because the coin that's flipped for the backwards chance is flipped less commonly or less often. There's a button here for random order. When that's applied, some of the other features are disabled because they don't make sense. So the progress chance is disabled, and some of the other things I'm about to show you are disabled, but you can have it switch to a random order as well. And you can also set it to automatically move backward with the backward button. So when that's enabled, it'll always move backward. Okay, then on a global or per step basis, you can determine whether it'll just skip over a step entirely. This is different from the play chance, which is determining whether that step has a gate or not. In that, you know, if you have it'll move from step 1 to step 3. It'll just jump over step 2. We have a global control for this. And as I decrease it, it'll skip over some steps. But we can also do this on a per step basis. So each of these lights represents one of the steps. So sometimes it's skipping over step 2 now. It'll go directly to step 3. The thing I'll point out about that is that it can't skip over successive steps. So if you set the chance for 2 steps in a row at 0, it'll still play the second one if it skips over the first. That's sort of just a design thing. In order to do this, the patch has to kind of look into the future, and it can only look into the future so much. But it's still, I think, a neat way to introduce some, you know, changes in a sequence. It's also a feature I just haven't seen before, which was part of the reason I wanted to program it in. Then on the third page, we have stuff that deals with pitch. So before I get into the probability mixer at the top of the page, I'll just point out you can choose whether or not the sequence is quantized by pressing this button. And you can change the quantized output. So I programmed it in C major, but I can change things to C harmonic minor. And go back to C major. So it's a quick way to change the feel of your sequence. So at the top we have this probability mixer. And there are 6 conditions you can set with it. And what it'll do is, based on the value of all 6 conditions, it'll weigh those and probabilistically determine which one is applied to a given step. So the first one is no change. That's pretty self-explanatory. If you don't want something to change, you keep that high. But we can also program in these different intervals and then assign weights to them. So this one is A1, which means it'll jump up an octave, and I'm going to increase that a little bit. So now we hear an octave jump, and I can add more of these. This is the chance that it'll drop a fifth. Let's do that one. We can also add in a chance that it'll randomly change from a range that is plus or minus an octave. And I'll point out that this is a function that's disabled when it's not quantized, because the random module isn't quantized that produces these values. It becomes quantized when it goes through the quantizer. So if you turn off quantization, there won't be random changes to pitch. And that's the patch. When you start putting these things together, you can create some really generative sequences from sort of really simple points of origin. So I'm just going to play around with it now and maybe run it through some mimeophone, which I have set up as sort of a reverb.